Alpha King Alaric cast out his barren Luna before the full moon. By midnight, the sacred moonborn wolves brought their dying cubs to her door. The great hall of the moonlit citadel was filled with heavy silence. Maribel Thorne stood alone in the center of the stone floor, dressed in a simple white gown that now felt too thin against the cold judgment of the pack. 5 years. 5 years she had stood beside Alpha King Alaric Vane as his Luna. 5 years she had endured the pitying stares, the whispered conversations, and the growing disappointment in her husband's golden eyes. Tonight, that disappointment had finally turned into action. Alaric stood on the raised dais tall and imposing in his black and silver robes. A long scar ran down the side of his neck, a reminder of the wars he had won. His expression was hard, but his eyes avoided hers. "Maribel Thorne," he said, his voice carrying across the hall. "For 5 winters you have been Luna of this pack. The Fertility Council has waited 5 winters. The pack will not wait a 6th. You have given us neither strength nor an heir." Beneath his ribs, his wolf struck once against his chest. Alaric's jaw tightened, but he forced the feeling down. Lady Cassera Morn stood just behind the dais, her hands resting lightly on the silver fertility crown. The crown that had once belonged to Maribel. The crown that would soon sit upon Cassera's head. Maribel lifted her chin. "I have served this pack faithfully," she said, her voice steady despite the storm inside her. "I have healed your wounded. I have stood beside your king in battle and in peace. If my womb is barren, then so be it. But I will not be cast out like a criminal for something I cannot control." A murmur ran through the crowd. Alaric's jaw tightened further. "The Fertility Council has decided," he said. "You are no longer Luna. You will leave the citadel by dawn. Another will take your place." Maribel felt something inside her crack. Not her pride that she still held, but the quiet hope she had carried for 5 years that one day her husband might look at her with something other than duty and disappointment. She turned without another word and walked out of the great hall. No one stopped her. That night, Maribel returned to the small cottage at the edge of the forest, the one she had once used as a healing house before she became Luna. She sat on the wooden steps and looked up at the full moon. She did not cry, but something ancient and quiet stirred deep within her chest. As the moon climbed higher, soft paws moved through the trees. From the darkness emerged several large wolves. Their fur was silver white, almost glowing under the moonlight. These were moon-born wolves, sacred guardians of the pack, rarely seen and deeply respected. They moved with purpose. The lead wolf carried something gently in its jaws. It stopped in front of Maribel and carefully placed a small, trembling cub at her feet. Then another wolf stepped forward. Then another. 5 tiny cubs lay before her, blind and fragile. Their breathing was shallow. The faint moonlight on their silver fur flickered weakly as if the life inside them was fading. Maribel stared in shock. The lead moon-born wolf looked at her with ancient, knowing eyes. Before it left, it pressed its cold nose to Maribel's trembling hand as if sealing a vow no council could undo. Then it turned and disappeared back into the forest with the others. Maribel knelt slowly. She reached out and touched the first cub. The moment her fingers brushed its fur, the tiny crescent mark on its forehead flared with silver light. Its breathing steadied. The weak glow on its body grew brighter. One by one, she touched the others. Each time the crescent marks lit up and the cubs stopped trembling. For 5 years, the pack had called her empty. Now, 5 fragile lives were breathing because she refused to let go. In the citadel, the silver fertility crown beneath Cassera's hands cracked cleanly down the middle. At the same moment, Alpha King Alaric Vane stood alone on the balcony of his chamber. His chest felt tight. His wolf stirred violently beneath his skin. He doubled over one hand, gripping the cold stone railing. His wolf howled one word through his bones. Mother. The 5 cubs stopped dying only when Maribel kept her hands on them. She sat on the wooden floor of the small cottage surrounded by the tiny moon-born wolves. Their breathing had become steady, and the silver crescent marks on their foreheads glowed softly in the dark. Whenever she moved her hands away, the marks dimmed and their breathing grew thin again. So she stayed close, her palms resting gently on their small bodies. Maribel tore strips from her own white gown and carefully wrapped the smallest cub against the cold. The fabric was thin, but it was all she had. The cub immediately pressed closer to her warmth. For 5 years, the pack had called her empty. Now, 5 fragile lives were breathing because she refused to let go. She did not notice the old floorboards warming beneath the cubs. She did not notice the cottage answering them beam by beam as if it remembered her name. Outside the forest was quiet. The moon-born wolves had not returned. In the citadel, Alpha King Alaric Vane stood alone in his chambers, one hand pressed against his chest. His wolf had not stopped pacing since the howl. Every time he tried to silence it, the beast pushed back harder. He walked to the window and looked toward the edge of the packlands where Maribel's cottage stood. A faint silver glow seemed to linger above the trees. He told himself it was only moonlight. But deep inside he knew it was not. His wolf stirred again, sending one clear command through his bones. Protect. Alaric reached for his cloak before he could stop himself. Then the council bell rang below. In the great hall, Lady Cassara Morn stood staring at the cracked silver fertility crown in her hands. The metal had split cleanly down the middle. She ran her fingers along the fracture, her expression cold and calculating. The crown had been prepared for her. It was meant to be placed on her head at dawn, marking her as the new Luna, and now it lay broken, before the sun had even risen. She turned to the servant standing nearby. "Send word to High Fertility Elder Orlin Greaves," she said. "Tell him the former Luna is hiding something at the edge of the forest. If the moon has answered her, I want that answer broken before the king reaches it." The servant bowed and left. Cassara continued staring at the broken crown. Her fingers tightened around the cold metal. She would not let this humiliation stand. Back in the cottage, Maribel finally allowed herself to close her eyes for a moment. The cubs had fallen into a quiet sleep around her. Their warmth was strange and unfamiliar, yet it eased something deep inside her chest that had been cold for years. She did not notice the faint, silver glow gathering beneath the cottage door. And she did not notice that far away in the citadel, Alpha King Alaric Vane had stepped out onto the balcony and was staring in the direction of her cottage. Not pity, recognition. Before dawn, High Fertility Elder Orlin Greaves gave one quiet order. "Bring me the cubs before the king reaches her." Before dawn, 2 riders wearing the black and silver of the Fertility Council rode toward the edge of the forest. Their faces were grim. High Fertility Elder Orlin Greaves had given a direct order, and they knew better than to disobey. Inside the small cottage, Maribel Thorne sat on the wooden floor, surrounded by the 5 tiny moon-born cubs. Their breathing was steady now, and the silver crescent marks on their foreheads glowed softly. She had not slept. Every time one of the cubs stirred, she placed her hand on it, and the cub calmed immediately. She tore another strip from her already ruined white gown and wrapped it around the smallest cub whose breathing was still weaker than the others. The fabric smelled of earth and old herbs, but it was warm. The cub pressed its small head against her palm and fell back into a quiet sleep. Maribel looked at her hands. They were trembling not from fear, but from the strange warmth that now lived beneath her skin. A sound reached her ears. Horses. 2 sets of hooves moving quickly through the trees. Maribel's heart tightened. She carefully gathered the cubs closer, wrapping the torn gown around them like a protective nest. She stayed on the floor, her back against the wall, eyes fixed on the door. The riders stopped outside. One of them knocked sharply. "Open the door!" a man's voice called. "By order of High Fertility Elder, Orlin Greaves. We are here to retrieve the moonborn cubs." Maribel did not move. The second rider spoke, his tone colder. "The cubs do not belong to you. They are sacred to the pack. You have no right to keep them." Still, Maribel remained silent. The first rider knocked again, harder this time. "If you do not open the door, we will break it down." The blade struck the latch once. The smallest cub jerked in Maribel's arms, its crescent mark flashing weakly. Maribel's eyes turned cold. "Break that door," she said, her voice low but clear, "and every wolf in this forest will know who frightened them." The riders froze. One of them stepped closer to the threshold. The moment his boot touched the ground in front of the cottage, the black and silver council seal on his cloak began to blacken at the edge as if the cottage itself rejected his authority. He stepped back quickly. Inside, Maribel whispered to the cubs, "The moon brought them here. No council will carry them out dying." Outside, the two riders exchanged uneasy glances. Before they could decide what to do next, a low, powerful growl echoed from the forest behind them. From the shadows between the trees, 3 large, moon-born wolves stepped out. Their silver-white fur glowed faintly under the first light of dawn. They did not attack. They simply stood there, blocking the path to the cottage, their golden eyes fixed on the 2 men. The riders slowly lowered their weapons. One of them muttered, "We will return to the citadel." Without another word, the 2 men mounted their horses and rode away quickly. Inside the cottage, Maribel let out a slow breath. She looked down at the cubs. Their marks were glowing brighter now. She did not notice the faint silver glow gathering beneath the cottage door. Far away in the citadel, Alpha King Alaric Vane stood in the war room when a guard rushed in. "Your Majesty," the guard said, slightly out of breath. "2 riders sent by the Fertility Council have returned empty-handed. The wolves did not guard the cubs from her. They guarded her from us." Alaric's golden eyes sharpened. He did not ask for more details. He turned and reached for his cloak. This time he did not stop himself. This time he would reach her before the council did. The first light of dawn had barely touched the trees when Alpha King Alaric Vane reached the edge of the forest. He rode alone. No guards, no council members, only his horse and the growing pull in his chest. His wolf had been silent since he left the citadel, but it was a heavy, focused silence, the kind that came before a decision that could not be undone. When he saw the small cottage, he slowed his horse. The door was closed. A faint silver glow still lingered beneath the threshold, faint but unmistakable. 3 large, moon-born wolves stood guard a short distance away, their golden eyes watching him without aggression. They did not move, but their presence was clear. This place was no longer ordinary ground. Alaric dismounted. He walked toward the cottage slowly, each step heavier than the last. For the first time in years, he felt uncertain. He had cast Maribel out. He had taken her title. And yet here he was, standing in front of her door like a man who no longer trusted his own judgment. He stopped a few paces away and called out, "Maribel." Inside, Maribel's hands tightened around the cubs. She recognized his voice immediately. For a moment, she did not answer. Then she carefully placed the cubs into the nest she had made from torn cloth and stood up. She walked to the door but did not open it. "What do you want, Alaric?" she asked. Her voice was calm, but there was steel beneath it. Alaric stood outside staring at the wooden door. "I want to see them," he said. "The cubs." There was a long pause. Then the door opened. Maribel stood in the doorway, her white gown torn and stained, her dark hair loose around her shoulders. Behind her 5 tiny moon-born cubs lay in a nest on the floor, their silver crescent marks glowing softly. When they sensed Alaric's presence, the marks flared brighter for a moment before settling again. Alaric's golden eyes moved to the cubs. He had expected to feel anger or at least confusion. Instead, something deep in his chest loosened. He took one step forward, then stopped when Maribel did not move aside. "They were dying when they came to me," she said quietly. "The moon-born wolves placed them at my feet. Only my touch keeps them breathing." Alaric looked at her. His wolf stirred again. "Protect." He did not fight it this time. "I was wrong," he said. The words came out rougher than he intended. "I listened to the council. I listened to fear. I did not listen to my wolf." Maribel studied his face. There was no softness in her eyes, but there was no hatred either. "You listened to what the pack expected of you," she said. "That is what kings do." Alaric took another step closer. "And what do you expect of me now, Maribel?" She looked at him for a long moment. "I expect you to choose," she said. "Not as a king, as a man. Because if you keep standing between two sides, both will break." Alaric's jaw tightened. Before he could answer, the sound of approaching hooves reached them. From the direction of the citadel, another group of riders was coming. This time, there were more than two, and they were not wearing the colors of the Fertility Council. They were wearing the colors of Lady Cassera Morn. Alaric turned, his expression darkening. Maribel stepped back into the cottage and picked up the cubs, holding them close. Alaric looked at her one last time. "Stay inside," he said. "Do not open the door for anyone but me." He turned and walked toward the riders, his hand resting on the hilt of his sword. This time he was not going to let anyone take what the moon had given her, not without going through him first. Alaric stood in the clearing between the cottage and the approaching riders, his hand resting on the hilt of his sword. The morning light was still weak, but it was enough to show the black and silver banners on the riders' cloaks, the personal seal of Lady Cassera Morn. There were 8 of them, all armed. The lead rider slowed his horse when he saw the Alpha King standing alone. "Your Majesty," the man said, bowing his head but not dismounting. "Lady Cassera sent us to retrieve the moon-born cubs. The Fertility Council believes they are in danger in the hands of the former Luna." Alaric's golden eyes were cold. "The former Luna is under my protection," he said. "The cubs stay with her. Turn back." The rider hesitated. He looked at the other men, then back at Alaric. "Lady Cassera said you might say that. She also said the pack has a right to know if the cubs are being used for forbidden magic." Alaric took one step forward. His voice dropped to a dangerous level. "Tell Lady Cassera that if she sends anyone else near this cottage without my direct order, I will consider it an act of treason." The riders exchanged uneasy glances. They had come expecting to deal with a disgraced Luna, not the Alpha King himself standing guard. The lead rider bowed again deeper this time. "As you command, Your Majesty." They turned their horses and rode back toward the citadel. Alaric remained standing in the clearing until the sound of hooves faded completely. Only then did he turn back toward the cottage. Maribel stood in the doorway, the 5 cubs still held protectively against her chest. She had watched the entire exchange. "You did not have to come," she said quietly. Alaric walked closer. He stopped a few paces away, as if unsure whether he was still welcome. "My wolf would not let me stay away," he admitted. "And neither would I." He looked at the cubs. Their silver marks were glowing steadily, now stronger than before. "They are calmer when you are near," Maribel said. "Even when I am exhausted, they settle the moment you step close." Alaric's jaw tightened. He reached out slowly and touched the edge of one cub's ear. The tiny creature did not pull away. Its crescent mark flared brighter for a moment, then settled. "I do not understand what is happening," he said, But I know I was wrong to cast you out. The pack needed an heir. I needed an heir. But the moon had other plans. Maribel looked at him. And what do you plan now, Alaric? He met her eyes. To protect what I should have protected from the beginning. Inside the cottage, one of the cubs suddenly whimpered. Its mark flickered. Maribel's scar flared hot in response. She stepped back inside. Alaric followed. The cubs were restless again. Their marks were pulsing unevenly. Something is wrong, Maribel whispered. They are being pulled again. Alaric's expression darkened. Cassera, he said. She is not finished. He placed his hand on the wall of the cottage. For a moment, nothing happened. Then a faint golden light spread from Maribel's scar through the wooden beams, meeting the silver light of the cubs. The cottage itself seemed to answer. The floorboards warmed. The air grew still. The cubs settled once more. Alaric looked at Maribel with new understanding. You are not just keeping them alive, he said. You are binding them, and they are binding you. Maribel nodded slowly. I think the moon is trying to show us something we have forgotten. Outside, far in the distance, the old Luna bell in the citadel began to ring again. Not once, but repeatedly urgent and insistent. Lady Cassera had not given up. She was calling the entire pack to the great hall, and this time she would not come alone. Alaric looked toward the sound, then back at Maribel and the cubs. We cannot hide here forever, he said. If we want the pack to accept us, we must face them together. Maribel held the cubs closer. Then we face them, she said. But not as a disgraced Luna and a guilty king, as the true Luna and the Alpha who chose her. Alaric reached out and gently touched her arm. Together, he said. The sun was rising, and the final confrontation was coming. The great hall was already full when Alaric and Maribel arrived. Word had spread like wildfire through the packlands. The former Luna had returned. She carried 5 moonborn cubs. The Alpha King himself had gone to her cottage. And now they walked into the hall together. Alaric in his black and silver robes, Maribel still wearing her torn white gown, the 5 glowing cubs nestled safely against her chest. The pack parted before them. Some wolves lowered their heads in respect. Others stared with open suspicion. Lady Cassera Morn stood at the front of the Fertility Council, her face pale, but her eyes burning with fury. High Fertility Elder Orlin Greaves stood beside her, the dark ritual crystal still clutched in his hand. Alaric stopped in the center of the hall. Maribel stood beside him, her posture straight. Despite the exhaustion in her eyes, the entire pack fell silent. Alaric's voice rang out clear and commanding. Last night I cast out Maribel Thorne because I believed she could not give this pack what it needed. I was wrong. A ripple of shock moved through the crowd. He continued. The moonborn wolves brought 5 cubs to her cottage. They were dying. Only her touch keeps them alive. The silver crescent marks on their foreheads glow in her presence. This is not a curse. This is the old bond awakening. Lady Cassera stepped forward, her voice sharp. She is using forbidden magic to deceive you, Your Majesty. These cubs belong to the pack, not to a woman who failed for 5 years to give you an heir. Maribel looked at Cassera calmly. She gently adjusted one of the cubs in her arms. The tiny creature nuzzled closer, its crescent mark flaring bright silver. The moon wolves chose me, Maribel said. Not the council, not ambition. The moon itself brought these lives to my door. If you try to take them from me, you will answer to the moon, not to me. One of the cubs whimpered. Maribel placed her glowing palm on it, and the whimper stopped. The entire hall watched in stunned silence as the crescent mark steadied and glowed stronger. High Fertility Elder Orlin Greaves raised the dark crystal. This is an abomination, he declared. The old laws are clear. A Luna who cannot bear an heir must be replaced. These cubs must be taken to the sacred nursery for proper care. He raised the crystal higher. Dark energy began to pulse toward the cubs. Maribel stepped forward. Golden light burst from the scar on her palm, meeting the dark energy head-on. The two forces collided in the center of the hall, sending sparks of silver and black across the stone floor. The cubs cried out. Alaric moved without thinking. He drew his sword and struck the dark crystal from Orlan's hand. The crystal shattered on the floor. The dark energy vanished. Silence fell again. Alaric's voice was low and final. Enough. The old laws that measured a Luna only by the number of heirs she could produce are broken tonight. Maribel is my Luna. She is the true Luna. The moon wolves have chosen her. The cubs have chosen her, and I choose her. He turned to the pack. Anyone who raises a hand against her or these cubs will answer to me. The hall remained silent for a long moment. Then slowly, one wolf after another began to kneel. First the younger ones, then the elders, until the entire great hall was on its knees before Maribel and the 5 glowing cubs in her arms. Lady Cassera stood alone, her face white with rage and disbelief. Alaric turned to Maribel. He knelt before her once more, this time not in private but before the entire pack. I was wrong, he said, his voice carrying through the hall. I ask your forgiveness not as a king but as a man who failed to see what was right in front of him. Maribel looked down at him. Tears slipped down her cheeks, but her voice was steady. I forgive you, she said, and I choose you, not as a replacement but as my equal. Alaric rose and pulled her into his arms. He kissed her in front of the entire pack. A kiss filled with redemption, devotion, and the beginning of something real. Golden and silver light filled the hall as the ash bond awakened fully. The old era of fear had ended. A new one had begun. The great hall remained on its knees long after the golden and silver light had faded. Maribel stood beside Alaric. The 5 moonborn cubs still nestled safely against her chest. Their silver crescent marks glowed steadily, now no longer flickering with weakness. The pack watched her with a mixture of awe, fear, and dawning acceptance. Lady Cassera Morn was the only one still standing. Her face was a mask of controlled fury, but her hands trembled at her sides. This is madness, she hissed. You would throw away 5 years of tradition for a woman who could not give you an heir, for cubs that should not even exist in her care. Alaric's golden eyes turned to her cold and final. The moon has already judged, he said, and it has chosen her. You will leave this hall, Cassera. Your ambitions end tonight. Cassera laughed bitterly, but there was desperation in the sound. You think the pack will follow you after this. They need strength. They need certainty. Not a barren woman playing mother to sacred cubs she stole. One of the cubs in Maribel's arms whimpered. Maribel placed her glowing palm on it, and the whimper stopped. The crescent mark flared brighter, as if answering her touch. The entire hall saw it. Maribel looked at Cassera with quiet strength. I did not steal them, she said. They were dying when the moon wolves brought them to me. They live because I refused to let them die. If that makes me a threat to you, then perhaps your power was never built on the moon's will. Cassera's face twisted. She raised her hand, and a final dark pulse of energy shot from the broken remnants of the fertility crown toward the cubs. Alaric moved to shield Maribel, but he was not fast enough. The dark energy struck. But instead of harming the cubs, it met the golden light from Maribel's scar and shattered like glass. The light spread outward, washing over the entire hall. Where it touched the pack members, faint silver marks appeared on their chests for a brief moment, the old bond awakening in those who still carried the blood. Many wolves gasped and touched their chests. Cassera staggered back, her face drained of color. High fertility elder Orland Greaves fell to his knees, the dark crystal in his hand crumbling to dust. Maribel looked at the pack, her voice soft but carrying through the hall. I do not want revenge, she said. I want the pack to heal. The moon does not choose through strength alone. It chooses through compassion, through the willingness to protect what is fragile. She looked down at the cubs, then back at the pack. If you will let me, I will protect all of you the same way. One by one, more wolves lowered their heads. Even those who had supported Cassera began to kneel. Cassera stood alone for a long moment. Then she turned and walked out of the hall without another word, her loyal followers trailing behind her in silence. Alaric watched her go, then turned to Maribel. He took her hand, the one with the glowing scar, and raised it gently. Maribel Thorne, he said, his voice carrying through the hall. You are my Luna. You are the true Luna. And from this day forward, the moonlit pack will honor the old bond once more. The old Luna bell rang again, this time not in warning but in celebration. Later that night, in the quiet of the East Wing, Maribel sat on the wide bed with the 5 cubs sleeping peacefully beside her. Alaric stood by the window watching the moon. He turned to her. I do not deserve your forgiveness, he said quietly, but I will spend the rest of my life earning it. Maribel looked at him. The exhaustion of the day was heavy in her eyes, but there was also peace. You already began earning it when you stood between me and the council, she said. That is enough for tonight. Alaric walked over and knelt beside the bed. He reached out and gently touched one of the cubs. The tiny creature stirred, but did not wake. His wolf was quiet now, not silenced, at peace. Outside, the forest was still, but far away in a hidden chamber beneath the citadel, Lady Cassera Morn stood before an ancient altar, her hands covered in dark blood. She had not given up. The final war for the throne had only just begun. The days that followed were fragile. Maribel spent most of her time in the East Wing with the 5 moon-born cubs. They grew stronger with every passing hour, their silver crescent marks glowing steadily whenever she was near. The pack watched from a distance, some with hope, others with lingering doubt. But no one dared challenge the Alpha King's decision openly. Alaric stayed close. He visited every evening, sometimes sitting in silence while she cared for the cubs, sometimes speaking in low tones about the old records he had begun to study. The bond between them was still careful, still tentative, but it was growing. Yet peace never lasted long in the moonlit pack. On the 7th night, Maribel woke to the sound of the cubs whimpering. She sat up quickly. The silver marks on their foreheads were flickering wildly. One of the cubs, the smallest, was trembling, its breathing shallow again. Maribel placed both hands on it, golden light flowing from her scar. The cubs steadied, but the other 4 continued to whimper. Something was pulling at them from afar. Alaric burst into the room moments later, his sword already drawn. His golden eyes were sharp with alarm. Cassera, he said. She has not given up. My scouts report movement near the old ritual grounds. She is using the forbidden rite again, stronger this time. Maribel gathered the cubs closer. They are connected to me now, she said. If she hurts them, she hurts me. Alaric's jaw tightened. He reached out and placed his hand over hers on the smallest cub. For a brief moment, golden light flared where their skin touched. His wolf surged forward, inside him no longer hesitant. Protect. We end this tonight, he said. They moved through the citadel together, Maribel carrying the cubs wrapped securely against her chest. Varith, who had taken to resting near the east wing, followed like a living shadow, its massive form clearing the path. The old ritual grounds lay deep in the forest, a circle of ancient standing stones, stained with generations of blood and moonlight. When they arrived, Lady Cassera Morn stood at the center, surrounded by loyal members of the old Fertility Council. Dark energy swirled around a ritual altar, pulsing toward the citadel, toward the cubs. Cassera turned as they approached. Her face was gaunt, eyes wild with desperation. "You should have stayed gone," she hissed at Maribel. "The pack needs strength, not miracles from a barren woman. These cubs are proof of nothing but your deception." She raised her hands. The dark energy surged. Maribel stepped forward. Golden light burst from her scar, meeting the attack head-on. The two forces collided in the center of the ritual circle, sending shockwaves through the trees. The cubs cried out in pain. Alaric moved like a storm. He charged forward, sword flashing, cutting through the dark tendrils. Varith roared and slammed its massive body into the standing stones, shattering several of them and breaking the ritual formation. Cassera screamed in fury. The dark energy faltered. Maribel kept her hands on the cubs, pouring golden light into them. One by one, their crescent marks stabilized and glowed, brighter than ever. The ritual collapsed. Cassera fell to her knees, the last of her power draining away. Alaric stood over her sword, pointed at her throat. "You tried to kill sacred cubs to keep your power," he said. "You tried to kill the woman the moon chose. Your ambition ends here." Cassera looked up at him, hatred burning in her eyes. "You will regret choosing her," she whispered. "The old ways always return." Alaric lowered his sword. "No," he said. "They die tonight." He turned to the council members who had followed Cassera. "Take her. She will face judgment before the pack at dawn." As Cassera was dragged away, Maribel stepped closer to Alaric. The cubs had calmed completely, their marks glowing steadily once more. She looked up at him. "You chose," she said softly. Alaric reached out and gently brushed a strand of hair from her face. "I chose you," he replied, "and I will keep choosing you." In the distance, the old Luna bell rang again, this time clear and triumphant. The pack was waiting. The final judgment was coming. Dawn broke over the moonlit citadel with a cold, clear light. The entire pack had gathered in the great hall once more. This time there was no silence of judgment, only the low murmur of anticipation and unease. Wolves stood shoulder to shoulder, their eyes fixed on the center of the hall where Lady Cassera Morn knelt in chains, her once elegant robes torn and stained. High Fertility Elder Orlin Greaves and the remaining members of the old council knelt beside her. Alpha King Alaric Vane stood on the raised dais, tall and commanding. Maribel stood beside him, no longer in her torn white gown, but in a simple silver robe that glowed faintly in the morning light. The 5 moonborn cubs rested in a nest of soft furs. At her feet, their silver crescent marks steady and strong. Alaric's voice echoed through the hall. "Last night, Lady Cassera Morn used forbidden rites to attack sacred moonborn cubs and the woman the moon has chosen. She sought to kill what the pack needs most, the old bond between us and the wolves we serve." Cassera lifted her head, her eyes burning with defiance even in defeat. "I did what was necessary," she said. "A barren woman cannot lead this pack. She will bring weakness. She will bring ruin." Maribel stepped forward. She knelt beside the smallest cub and placed her hand on its back. The crescent mark flared bright silver. The cub let out a soft, healthy sound. The entire hall watched. "I am not barren," Maribel said, her voice calm but carrying. "I am what this pack has forgotten. The moon does not measure a Luna by the number of heirs she can bear. It measures her by her ability to protect life, even when it is fragile." She looked at Cassera. "You tried to kill these cubs to keep your power. The moon has judged you instead." Alaric raised his hand. "Lady Cassera Morn and those who followed her in this betrayal are hereby stripped of all titles and banished from the moonlit pack. Their names will be struck from the records. The Fertility Council is dissolved. From this day forward, we will honor the old ways, the ways of trust and compassion. A long silence filled the hall. Then one by one the wolves began to kneel. First the younger ones, then the elders. Until the entire pack was on its knees before Maribel and the 5 glowing cubs. Alaric turned to Maribel. He took her hand and knelt before her once more. This time, not in private, not in front of the army, but before the entire pack. Maribel Thorne, he said, his voice clear and unwavering. You are my Luna. You are the true Luna. And I choose you, not because the moon demands it, but because my heart, my wolf, and my pack need you. Maribel looked down at him. Tears slipped down her cheeks, but her voice was steady. I accept you, she said, as my king, as my mate, as the man who learned to choose truth over fear. Alaric rose and pulled her into his arms. He kissed her deeply in front of the entire pack, a kiss filled with years of missed time, hard-earned redemption, and the beginning of a love that had survived rejection, humiliation, and ancient curses. Golden and silver light exploded outward from them, spreading through the hall and across the packlands. The old Luna bell rang loud and clear. The moon wolves howled from the forest in triumph. The old era of fear had truly ended. A new one had begun. The full moon rose once more over the moonlit packlands, but this time it brought peace instead of judgment. In the great hall adorned with fresh silver banners and blooming night flowers, Alpha King Alaric Vane stood before the entire pack with Maribel Thorne at his side. She wore a simple yet elegant silver robe that caught the moonlight. The 5 moonborn cubs, now strong and playful, tumbling around her feet in a nest of soft furs. Alaric took her hand and raised it so all could see the glowing scar on her palm. Tonight, he said, his voice carrying through the hall, we honor what we almost lost. Maribel is not merely my Luna. She is the true Luna, the mother Luna, the one the moon wolves themselves chose. She has shown us that strength is not only in the blade or the bloodline, but in the willingness to protect what is fragile. He turned to her fully. Maribel, before this pack, before the moon and before the wolves who watch over us, I ask you again, not as a king seeking an heir, but as a man who has learned what it means to truly see. Will you stand with me as my queen, my mate, and the heart of this pack? Maribel looked at him, her eyes shining with quiet emotion. She had endured public humiliation, exile, and the weight of being called Barren. Now she stood here not broken, but transformed. I will, she said, her voice clear and steady. I choose you, Alaric, not because the pack demands it, but because you chose truth when everything pushed you toward fear. We will lead this pack together as equals. Alaric pulled her into his arms and kissed her deeply in front of the entire pack. A kiss filled with hard-earned redemption, deep devotion, and the promise of a future they had both fought for. Golden and silver light exploded outward from them, spreading through the hall and across the pack lands. The old Luna bell rang loud and clear. The moon wolves howled from the forest in triumph. The 5 cubs lifted their heads and joined the chorus with small, bright howls of their own. In the months that followed, the moonlit pack changed forever. The old laws that measured worth only by heirs and strength were rewritten. The Fertility Council was replaced by a new council that honored both the old bonds and the new. Moonborn wolves began appearing more frequently from the deep forest drawn by the awakened true Luna. The pack grew stronger, not through fear, but through trust. Kale ruled with a balance of strength and compassion he had never known before. His wolf was finally at peace. One quiet spring evening, Maribel and Alaric stood together on the highest balcony overlooking the blooming packlands. The 5 moonborn cubs, now strong and playful, tumbled around their feet. Alaric wrapped his arms around Maribel from behind his hand, resting gently over her slightly rounded belly. Our child will never know what it means to be measured by what they can give, he murmured against her hair. They will grow up, knowing they are loved for who they are. Maribel smiled and leaned back against him. And they will know that even those the pack once called barren can become the mother of new life, she whispered. Not just of cubs, but of hope. The moonwolves howled softly in the distance. The woman the pack had cast out as worthless had become its heart and savior. Their love was not born of perfect circumstances. It was forged in public humiliation, broken crowns, dying cubs, and the courage to choose truth over tradition. It was a love that taught an alpha king that true strength lies not in control but in protection, trust, and the willingness to kneel before what is right. And in the heart of the moonlit pack, a strong, steady flame burned bright, one that would never be allowed to die again.